Picture this: a lone samurai standing beneath a cascade of pale pink cherry blossoms, the delicate petals drifting like snow around him. It's a scene of serene beauty, yet the figure at its center is anything but fragile. Clad in armor, his sword at his side, he embodies a paradox, the harmony of grace and unshakable discipline. This is the world of the samurai, where every moment was a balance between the artistry of life and the razor's edge of death. For centuries, these warriors have captivated imaginations, their stories woven into the fabric of history. But how much do we truly understand about their way of life? Behind the legends and Hollywood portrayals lies a culture rich with complexity, governed by a code so profound it shaped an entire nation. Welcome to the hidden world of the samurai, where honor wasn't just a principle, it was a way of being. The samurai didn't just wield swords, they lived by a philosophy known as Bushido, the way of the warrior. This code wasn't a mere set of rules, it was the heartbeat of their existence, influencing everything from battlefield tactics to the quiet rituals of daily life. Loyalty, courage, and integrity weren't just ideals, they were the pillars holding up an entire society. Yet for all their discipline, the samurai were far more than just soldiers. They were poets, calligraphers, and even tea masters, finding beauty in the very moments between conflicts. How did these warriors reconcile the brutality of war with such refined artistry? The answer lies in the surprising nuances of their culture, a tapestry of contradictions that defies simple explanation. Today, we're unraveling 25 astonishing facts about the samurai and their code of honor. Facts that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Did you know some samurai were actually skilled diplomats, negotiating peace treaties with the same precision they used in combat? Or that their training often included meditation and flower arrangement to sharpen their focus? From the battlefield to the tea room, their lives were a masterclass in balance and intention. So join us as we step into their world, where every detail from the curve of a sword to the silence of a Zen garden holds a deeper meaning. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an invitation to see the samurai as they truly were, not just warriors, but philosophers, artists, and guardians of a legacy that still resonates today. The image of a samurai as a battle-hardened warrior, sword always at the ready, is so deeply ingrained in popular culture that it's hard to imagine them as anything else. But here's a twist: samurai weren't always fighters. In fact, during the 9th to 12th centuries, many were aristocrats, landowners, and government officials who rarely drew their blades. Their early roles revolved around administration, tax collection, and managing estates, more like feudal bureaucrats than the legendary swordsmen we picture today. The shift to a military class happened gradually, fueled by Japan's growing political chaos. As regional conflicts erupted and power struggles intensified, these once paper-pushing nobles found themselves needing to defend their lands and their influence. Take Tera no Kiyomori, one of the most famous samurai of this transitional era. He didn't rise to prominence through battlefield heroics alone. Instead, he masterfully navigated court politics, forming strategic alliances and consolidating power until he effectively ruled Japan from behind the scenes. By the late 12th century, he'd become the first samurai to hold the title of imperial chancellor, a position traditionally reserved for the nobility. His story shatters the stereotype of the samurai as mere sword wielders. They were also shrewd politicians, capable of shaping an empire with wit as much as steel. This evolution reveals a fascinating truth: the samurai's identity was never static. they adapted to the times, transforming from civil servants to military elites as Japan's landscape demanded. It's a reminder that history is rarely as simple as legends make it seem, and that even the most iconic warriors had to start somewhere. Far from being born soldiers, the samurai became warriors out of necessity, proving that their greatest strength lay not just in their blades, but in their ability to reinvent themselves. Here's something that might shatter your expectations: the legendary katana, the iconic sword we associate so deeply with samurai, wasn't actually their primary weapon in battle. While Hollywood loves to show these warriors drawing their gleaming blades at every opportunity, the reality was far more practical. On the battlefield, samurai relied first on bows, spears like the yari, and polearms such as the naginata. These weapons offered reach, versatility, and tactical advantages that a sword simply couldn't match in open combat. The katana was often a last resort, pulled only when other options were exhausted or when fighting in close quarters. Take the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, a turning point in samurai warfare. This clash wasn't decided by flashing swords, but by the disciplined use of spears and the revolutionary introduction of gunpowder. Oda Nobunaga's forces, armed with arquebuses and tightly formed ranks of spear-wielding infantry, decimated the famed cavalry charges of the Taikta clan. The legendary warlord Taikta Shinjin once famously said, "A warrior's strength lies not in his sword, but in his strategy and the tools at his command." His words capture a truth often overlooked: the samurai were masters of adaptation, not bound by tradition but by what worked on the battlefield. So how did the katana rise to such symbolic prominence? The answer lies in the peaceful Edo period, when Japan entered over 2 centuries of relative stability under Tokugawa rule. With large-scale battles fading into memory, the sword transformed from a practical weapon into a revered art form and a marker of social status. Swordsmiths honed their craft to near mythical levels, creating blades that were as much about beauty as function. The katana became a soulful extension of the warrior's identity, embodying Bushido's ideals even when its edge was rarely tested in combat. This shift reveals a deeper truth about the samurai: their legacy wasn't just forged in war, but in how they redefined themselves when the fighting stopped. From the chaos of the battlefield to the quiet dignity of the Edo era, the katana's journey mirrors the samurai's own evolution. It's a reminder that symbols often outgrow their original purpose, becoming something far greater than the sum of their steel. The next time you picture a samurai, imagine not just the sword at his hip, but the bow in his hands, the spear at his side, and the cunning in his mind, because a true warrior knew that victory rarely came from a single blade alone. Seppuku, the ritual suicide often romanticized in films, was nothing like the hurried, dramatic scenes Hollywood portrays. In reality, it followed an intricate 12-step ceremony steeped in symbolism and precision. The process began with the condemned samurai bathing meticulously, then dressing in a stark white kimono, the color of death and purity in Japanese culture. He would be served a final meal, often his favorite dishes, a moment of bittersweet reflection before the inevitable. The ritual unfolded in a carefully prepared space, sometimes on a raised platform with white sand to absorb blood, surrounded by solemn witnesses. When the moment came, the samurai would kneel, open his kimono to expose his abdomen, and take up a short blade wrapped in paper to ensure a firm grip. With one deliberate motion, he would cut horizontally from left to right, then upward, a gruesome act meant to demonstrate unshakable resolve. But here's where Hollywood gets it wrong. Death rarely came from the belly wound alone. Standing beside him was the kaishakunin, a trusted swordsman tasked with delivering the mercy strike. His role wasn't just about ending suffering, it was about timing. Decapitation had to occur the instant the blade touched flesh, preserving the dying man's dignity by sparing him the indignity of crying out or collapsing mid-cut. A mistimed strike too early or too late could disgrace both participants. The infamous Oko vendetta of 1703 offers a haunting glimpse into seppuku's gravity. After avenging their lord's unjust death, the 47 Ronin were ordered to die by their own hands rather than face execution. Their seppuku wasn't a chaotic bloodbath but a series of methodical, almost meditative acts, each man meeting his end with chilling composure. Contrast this with failed seppuku attempts, where a botched cut or a wavering resolve brought lasting shame. Families of those who faltered might be stripped of status, their names erased from records, a fate worse than death in a society built on honor. What makes this ritual so revealing isn't just its brutality, but what it tells us about the samurai worldview. Death wasn't merely an escape from disgrace. It was a performance, a final act of control in a life governed by discipline. Every detail, from the white kimono to the precise angle of the blade, was a testament to the belief that how one died mattered as much as how one lived. In this light, seppuku wasn't just suicide. It was the ultimate expression of a code that prized honor above breath itself. When we think of samurai, the image that comes to mind is almost always male, but history tells a far more fascinating story. Women of the samurai class weren't just passive figures waiting at home. Many trained rigorously in martial arts, mastering weapons like the naginata, a deadly polearm with a curved blade perfect for keeping opponents at a distance. These warrior women, known as onna-musha, fought alongside men, defended castles, and even led armies into battle. Take Tomo Gozen, one of Japan's most legendary female warriors. Described in historical texts as a bow-wielding, sword-swinging force of nature, she fought in the Genpei War of the 12th century, her skill and bravery earning her a place in countless tales. Unlike the delicate noblewomen of European courts, samurai women were expected to be just as disciplined and capable as their male counterparts, especially when war came to their doorstep. Naginata training wasn't just about combat, it was woven into the very fabric of a noblewoman's upbringing. From a young age, daughters of samurai families practiced with these weapons, learning to defend their homes during sieges or when their husbands were away at war. The naginata's long reach made it ideal for fighting on foot, allowing a single warrior to hold off multiple attackers. This wasn't just theoretical history records astonishing examples like Hangoku Gozen, a warrior noblewoman who commanded 3,000 troops during the Kenin Rebellion in the early 13th century. When her fortress was besieged, she didn't retreat. She stood on the front lines, rallying her forces with such ferocity that even the enemy chronicles praised her courage. Yet for all their battlefield prowess, the contributions of these women have often been overshadowed by the male-dominated narratives of samurai history. Unlike the European tradition, where women warriors were often seen as exceptions, Japan's onna-musha were an accepted if underappreciated part of military life. They weren't anomalies, they were products of a culture that understood war spared no one, and that honor wasn't reserved by gender. The naginata itself became a symbol of female resilience, so much so that even today, it remains a central part of women's martial arts training in Japan. The legacy of these warrior women forces us to rethink what we know about the samurai. They weren't just a brotherhood of swordsmen, they were families bound by a shared code where every member man or woman had a role in upholding their clan's honor. The next time you picture a samurai, imagine not just the armored men on horseback, but the women standing shoulder to shoulder with them, blades gleaming, ready to defend what mattered most. Because in the world of the samurai, courage wasn't measured by gender, It was measured by the strength of one's spirit and the sharpness of one's resolve. Here's something that might surprise you: the Bushido Code, that sacred set of principles we associate with every noble samurai, wasn't actually written down as a unified philosophy until the 20th century. That's right, for centuries, the so-called way of the warrior existed as an unwritten ethos, passed down through actions and anecdotes rather than formal texts. It wasn't until 1900 when Japanese diplomat Nitobe Inazo penned Bushido, the soul of Japan, that these ideals were packaged into a single, elegant volume, and even then, it was aimed squarely at Western readers. Nitobe's book, written in English and dripping with romanticism, portrayed Bushido as Japan's answer to European chivalry, a noble code of honor that governed every aspect of a samurai's life. But historians raise an eyebrow at this tidy narrative. The truth: Bushido was far messier, far more contradictory, and far less codified than Nitobe's bestseller suggested. Take Hagakure, the early 18th century text often cited as a Bushido Bible. Its pages are filled with paradoxical advice urging warriors to embrace death while also cautioning against reckless bravery. One passage famously declares, "The way of the samurai is found in death." Yet another warns that throwing one's life away foolishly is the mark of a beast rather than a true warrior. Compare this to Nitobe's polished version, which glosses over these contradictions in favor of a streamlined moral framework. Why the discrepancy? Because Hagakure wasn't written as a manual. It was the rambling memoir of a retired samurai, Yamamoto Tsunetomo, who dictated his thoughts to a scribe out of nostalgia for a fading way of life. His words were personal, not prescriptive, a far cry from the rigid dogma later generations would imagine. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 turned everything upside down. As Japan rushed to modernize, the samurai class was abolished, their swords banned, and their privileges stripped away. Suddenly, a nation in transition needed a new identity, one that could honor its past while marching toward the future. Enter Bushido, resurrected and repurposed. Meiji-era nationalists seized on Nitobe's romanticized version, transforming it into a propaganda tool. The samurai spirit, they claimed, wasn't dead. It lived on in the disciplined soldier, the loyal bureaucrat, even the diligent schoolchild. This repackaging reached its peak during World War II, when Bushido was twisted to justify blind obedience and kamikaze sacrifice, a far cry from the nuanced balance of Hagakure. What does this tell us? That history is rarely as neat as the stories we tell about it. The Bushido we know today is less a medieval warrior's creed and more a modern invention, shaped by nostalgia, nationalism, and the need to explain Japan to the outside world. But perhaps that's the most samurai-like lesson of all: adaptability. Just as the warriors themselves evolved from aristocrats to soldiers to symbols, so too did their code, proof that even the most ancient traditions are never set in stone. The clash of steel and the whisper of a brush, two sounds that defined the samurai in equal measure. While we remember them for their battlefield prowess, these warriors were also poets, calligraphers, and painters who embraced Bunbu Ryodo, the ideal of balancing the pen and the sword. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a philosophy. Cultivating art and literature wasn't a distraction from their martial duties. It sharpened their minds, refined their focus, and deepened their understanding of the world they fought to protect. Take Oda Nobunaga, the ruthless warlord who nearly unified Japan in the 16th century. Behind his reputation as a brilliant strategist lay a man who found solace in poetry. One of his surviving haiku reads, "Life is but a dream / in the fleeting world / even a fortress / vanishes like dew." These lines, composed amid the chaos of war, reveal a startling depth. The same hands that orchestrated battles could pause to reflect on life's impermanence, channeling the Zen principles that influenced so much of samurai culture. Nobunaga wasn't an exception. He was part of a tradition where ink was as vital as iron. Step into the tea rooms of Edo period castles, and you'd find samurai hunched over delicate scrolls, practicing sumi-e-ink painting with the same precision they applied to sword drills. A single stroke of black ink could capture the curve of a bamboo stalk or the sweep of a mountain, exercises in discipline that mirrored their martial training. The tea ceremony, too, became a ritual of focus and restraint, where every movement from lifting a cup to folding a silk cloth was deliberate, meditative. For warriors who lived with death at their shoulders, these moments of stillness weren't frivolous, they were survival. What's truly remarkable is how these artistic pursuits shaped their approach to war. The same clarity needed to compose a flawless haiku, choosing each syllable with care translated to battlefield tactics. A general who could appreciate the empty spaces in a painting understood the power of patience, of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The connection runs so deep that some sword schools incorporated calligraphy into their training, believing the fluidity of brushwork honed the fluidity of the blade. This duality challenges every stereotype. The samurai weren't just brutes in armor. They were thinkers who wielded culture as deftly as weapons. Their legacy reminds us that true strength lies not in force alone, but in the ability to hold opposites in balance, the fierceness of the warrior and the sensitivity of the artist forever intertwined. Picture a hardened samurai warlord, his face framed not by a menacing helmet, but by a pair of delicate, round-lensed spectacles. This unexpected image was surprisingly common in late 16th century Japan. When Portuguese traders first arrived in 1543, they brought more than muskets and Christianity. They introduced something far more unlikely as a status symbol: eyeglasses. These brillenhändler, as the Dutch called them, became instant luxuries among the elite. Daimyo like Shimazu Yoshihisa of Satsuma were known to pay sums equivalent to a farmer's yearly income for a single pair, not because they needed vision correction, but because the delicate frames signaled sophistication and access to the exotic. The Nanban trade period, when European ships flooded Japan with foreign goods, sparked a fascination with Western technology that bordered on obsession. Samurai didn't just adopt practical imports like clocks or compasses, they turned everyday objects into fashion statements. Eyeglasses, especially those with tinted lenses, became the ultimate flex. Wealthy warriors would wear them indoors during tea ceremonies, the glass deliberately left uncorrected to prove they owned them purely for style. Records from Jesuit missionaries describe warlords hosting banquets where guests competed to showcase the rarest European curios, with spectacles often taking center stage. This trend reveals a side of the samurai rarely discussed: their willingness to embrace the foreign when it served their image. While later Edo period isolationism would paint them as traditionalists, the Azuchi Momoyama era showed a class eager to experiment. Even Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the unifier of Japan, reportedly received a pair of gilded spectacles as a diplomatic gift, though chroniclers noted he never wore them, preferring to display them as a trophy. The irony: many of these coveted imports were actually inferior to Japanese craftsmanship. Local artisans soon began producing exquisite replicas with adjustable bamboo nose bridges, blending European design with Edo-era practicality. What began as a fad became a cultural metaphor. The spectacle craze mirrored the samurai's dual identity, warriors who prized innovation yet cloaked it in tradition. Those round lenses weren't just windows to the world. They were a statement, proof that even Japan's fiercest defenders could adapt to a changing era, one fashionable accessory at a time. Locked away in Japan's 200 years of isolation, you'd expect the samurai to reject foreign ideas outright, yet behind closed doors, some were secretly dissecting corpses by candlelight, desperate to understand the mysteries of European medicine. In 1771, a group of curious scholars and samurai physicians gathered in a dim Edo warehouse, their hands trembling not with fear but anticipation. On the table before them lay the body of an executed criminal, and in their hands a smuggled Dutch anatomy book titled Ontlied Kundij Tafelen. Leading this forbidden experiment was Sujita Genpoku, a samurai-trained doctor who'd risked everything to challenge centuries of medical tradition. What they discovered that night would shatter Japan's reliance on ancient Chinese teachings and spark a quiet revolution. For generations, Japanese medicine had followed Chinese principles, believing illness stemmed from imbalances in mystical energies like Kai. The liver was thought to be the seat of courage, the heart a symbol of wisdom, concepts poetic but dangerously inaccurate. When Genpoku first compared the Dutch illustrations to the cadaver's exposed organs, the mismatch was undeniable. As we peeled back layers, he later wrote, "We found the stomach not where the Chinese texts claimed, but lower, shaped like a Western pouch. The lungs branched not in 5 directions, but like the limbs of a tree." Each incision confirmed what he'd suspected. Europe's science was precise where theirs was speculative. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Under the Tokugawa Sakoku policy, foreign books were banned, and contact with Europeans limited to a handful of Dutch traders confined to Nagasaki's artificial island of Dejima. Genpoku's team worked in secret, translating the Dutch text character by character, their progress painstaking. One participant, a samurai named Nakagawa Junin, even risked smuggling in a Dutch merchant to explain terms like aorta and diaphragm, words with no Japanese equivalents. Their finished work, Kaitai Shinsho, New Book of Anatomy, became Japan's first medical text based on empirical evidence, not tradition. Resistance was fierce. Established physicians mocked Genpoku's barbarian medicine, accusing him of betraying centuries of wisdom, but the samurai's pragmatic streak won out. By the 19th century, domains like Satsuma were quietly training doctors in Dutch methods, recognizing their battlefield advantages. A samurai wounded by a bullet didn't need poetry about Kai. He needed a surgeon who could locate the bleeding vessel. This shift reveals a profound truth. Even at the height of isolation, the samurai weren't blind traditionalists. When evidence contradicted dogma, they chose progress, proving that curiosity could flourish even behind closed borders. Genpoku's legacy lives on in Japan's medical schools, where students still study his translations. His story is a reminder that the samurai's greatest weapon wasn't just the sword, it was the mind, forever sharpened by the courage to question. In a world that demanded conformity, these warriors dared to lift the veil of the human body, one forbidden dissection at a time. Imagine a samurai flashing a smile, not with gleaming white teeth, but with jet-black enamel that gleamed like polished obsidian. This striking practice, called ohagyoro, was the height of aristocratic fashion among elite warriors, especially women of the samurai class. Far from being a quirky tradition, tooth blackening held deep cultural significance. The process involved a meticulous ritual. First, a solution of iron filings soaked in vinegar or tea would oxidize into a dark inkai paste. This was then carefully painted onto the teeth, often with a brush made from bird feathers. The result, a set of teeth that shimmered like lacquered wood, a look so prized it became synonymous with maturity, beauty, and high social standing. For samurai women, ohagyoro wasn't just cosmetic, it was a rite of passage. Once a girl reached marriageable age, usually around 13 or 14, she would blacken her teeth to signal her transition into adulthood. Married women maintained the practice as a symbol of fidelity and stability, their darkened smiles serving as public declarations of their roles as wives and mothers. Even among men, certain elite warriors and courtiers adopted the look, particularly those in positions of political influence. The contrast couldn't be starker with today's Hollywood portrayals of samurai, where pearly whites are the norm. In reality, a gleaming smile might have been seen as childish, or unsophisticated blackened teeth were the mark of a refined, worldly individual. The symbolism ran deeper than mere aesthetics. In a culture that associated purity with darkness, think of the lustrous black hair prized in classical poetry, ohaguro tied into broader ideals of elegance and restraint. The process also had practical benefits. The iron-based solution acted as a primitive sealant, protecting teeth from decay in an era before modern dentistry. Some historians even suggest the practice deterred infidelity, as the distinctive look made it harder for married women to blend into crowds unnoticed. Yet by the Meiji era, ohaguro had fallen out of favor, deemed archaic by a Japan eager to modernize. Today, the practice survives only in period dramas and cultural reenactments, a ghost of a time when beauty standards defied modern expectations. It's a reminder that the samurai world was far more nuanced than battlefield glory, a place where even something as intimate as a smile carried layers of meaning, where fashion and function intertwined in the most unexpected ways. Beneath the fleeting beauty of cherry blossoms lies a philosophy that shaped the samurai soul. These delicate pink flowers, celebrated today in festivals and postcards, held a far deeper meaning for Japan's warriors. In Buddhist thought, the sakura's brief bloom, often just a week before the petals scatter, mirrored the fragility of human life. For the samurai who faced death daily, this wasn't a morbid fixation but a profound meditation on existence. Yamamoto Tsunetomo, the Edo-era samurai whose writings became the Hagakure, put it starkly: "The warrior's life is like the cherry blossoms, both are beautiful because they do not linger." His words capture the essence of Bushido's embrace of mortality. A warrior who clung to life, Tsunetomo argued, was like a blossom refusing to fall, unnatural, even cowardly. True strength lay in flowering brilliantly, then letting go without hesitation when the moment came. This symbolism permeated every aspect of samurai culture. Warriors would gather under blooming trees not just to admire their beauty, but to steel their resolve. The act of hanami flower viewing wasn't always the cheerful picnic we know today. In medieval Japan, it was a spiritual exercise, a chance to contemplate the transience of all things. Some daimyo even planted cherry trees along castle walls, so their soldiers might internalize the blossom's lesson: glory, like spring, is fleeting. The famed warlord Takedo Shingen took this further, composing death poems comparing himself to falling petals, his words tinged not with fear but with acceptance. Modern Japan's hanami festivals, with their laughter and sake beneath pink canopies, might seem worlds apart from these solemn origins, yet the thread remains unbroken. When crowds gather in Tokyo's Ueno Park or Kyoto's Philosopher's Path, they're participating in a ritual that once prepared warriors for battle. The blossoms still whisper the old truth that life's beauty and brevity are inseparable. Even the timing of cherry blossom forecasts, eagerly awaited each year, echoes the samurai's mindfulness of impermanence. Meteorologists can predict the blooms down to the day, yet no one can stop their inevitable fall. The sakura's legacy reveals a paradox at the heart of samurai philosophy. By staring unflinchingly at death, they learn to live with unmatched intensity. Every sword stroke, every brush stroke of their calligraphy carried the weight of that awareness. Today, as petals drift onto modern sidewalks, they remind us that the warrior's wisdom wasn't about destruction, it was about presence. To bloom fully, knowing the wind will come, is perhaps the most courageous act of all. The sharpest katana wasn't proven by slicing bamboo or straw, it was tested on human flesh. In a practice as methodical as it was gruesome, swordsmiths and samurai performed Tameshigeri, or test cutting, on the bodies of executed criminals. The goal wasn't just to see if a blade could kill. It was to measure its precision, balance, and lethality in the most visceral way possible. 17th century records from Edo period sword schools detailed chilling classifications. One body cut cleaved cleanly through a single torso, while the rarest and most coveted rating, the 5-body cut, meant the sword could slice through 5 stacked corpses with a single stroke. These weren't just technical benchmarks, they were bragging rights, turning cadaver trials into a macabre competition among elite swordsmen. The process was anything but haphazard. Bodies were positioned in specific postures, sometimes seated, other times suspended, to replicate real combat scenarios. A diagonal cut through the ribs tested a blade's ability to shear through bone, while horizontal strikes measured its edge retention. Swords that passed were often engraved with the results, their hilts inscribed with grim notations like 2 bodies, hip joint. For collectors, these engravings became badges of honor, transforming weapons into gruesome works of art. One surviving blade in Tokyo's National Museum bears the inscription, Yamada a seaman tested, 3 bodies flawless, a testament to both the sword's quality and the cold efficiency of its evaluation. Yet Tameshigeri wasn't just about brutality. In a society where a warrior's life hinged on his weapon's reliability, these tests served a grim practicality. A sword that faltered mid-cut could mean death in battle, so samurai demanded empirical proof of their blade's worth. The practice also revealed a darker facet of Edo period justice. Condemned criminals, often thieves or murderers, were considered socially unclean, making their bodies acceptable for disposal in service to the warrior class. Their final role, ensuring the tools meant to protect honor, lived up to their purpose. What's rarely discussed is how Tameshigeri blurred the line between craftsmanship and spectacle. By the 18th century, public demonstrations became lurid entertainment, with crowds gathering to watch master swordsmen perform feats like slicing through helmets or severing iron spikes. The same culture that revered cherry blossoms for their fleeting beauty could also celebrate the clinical severing of flesh, a paradox that captures the samurai's complex relationship with life and death. Today, modern martial artists still practice test cutting, though now on rolled tatami mats designed to mimic human density. The echoes of Tameshigeri linger, a reminder that the finest swords were never just tools. They were extensions of a philosophy where perfection demanded the most unforgiving proofs. Behind the clang of swords and the shouts of battle drills, samurai warriors often knelt in silence, their hands carefully arranging delicate blooms in a ritual as precise as any sword strike. These weren't mere distractions, they were Ikebana duels, competitions where warriors demonstrated their artistic mastery under the same pressure they faced on the battlefield. In the quiet moments before combat, samurai would gather to create floral arrangements judged not just for beauty, but for the discipline and clarity of mind they revealed. A perfectly balanced spray of cherry blossoms or a stark single stem in a minimalist vase became a test of focus, proving that true warriors could channel the same calm in a tea room as they did in the chaos of war. One legendary tale captures this duality perfectly. During the tumultuous Sengoku period, the daimyo Hosokawa Sansai, a fierce warlord known for his tactical brilliance, paused his march to Kyoto upon spotting a field of wild chrysanthemums. While his generals urged haste, Sansai insisted on stopping to compose a poem celebrating the flower's resilience. To outsiders, it might have seemed like indulgence, but his men understood the deeper message. A leader who could appreciate fleeting beauty amid turmoil was a leader who wouldn't buckle under stress. This moment wasn't an exception, it was a lesson ingrained in samurai culture. The very act of arranging flowers demanded patience, spatial awareness, and an intuitive grasp of balance qualities that translated directly to swordsmanship. The parallels between Ikebana and combat ran deeper than metaphor. Specific schools of flower arrangement, like the Rika style, mirrored battlefield formations, with tall, commanding stems representing generals and shorter blooms symbolizing foot soldiers. Warriors trained to read arrangements as they would an enemy's stance, interpreting the tension between branches like the openings in a rival's guard. Some even believed that a poorly balanced bouquet betrayed a restless mind, a fatal flaw for a samurai. The great tea master Sen no Rikyu, who influenced countless warriors, once remarked, "The hand that arranges flowers must be as steady as the hand that draws the sword, for both reveal the soul." What makes these floral duels so fascinating isn't just their contrast with the samurai's violent profession, but what they tell us about the psychology of warfare. In an era where death was constant, Ikebana became a form of meditation, a way to confront mortality without flinching. A warrior who could lose himself in the curve of a camellia stem was a warrior unshaken by the unpredictability of battle. The next time you picture a samurai, imagine not just the bloodied blade, but the fingers that cradled fragile petals, because mastery, it seems, wasn't just about destruction. It was about holding opposites in perfect harmony, the ferocity of the warrior and the serenity of the artist forever intertwined. The tranquil tea room, with its hushed whispers and precise rituals, was the last place anyone expected bloodshed. Yet for samurai, the ceremony known as chinoyu could be as perilous as the battlefield. On the 21st of June, 1582, the warlord Oda Nobunaga knelt in Kyoto's Honno-ji temple, savoring the bitter froth of matcha, unaware his most trusted general had already surrounded the building with troops. As flames engulfed the wooden structure, Nobunaga's final act wasn't to reach for his sword, but to compose a poem, his jisai or death verse, before vanishing into the smoke. The ambush, orchestrated by Eiichai Mitsuhide during what should have been a moment of serenity, exposed tea gatherings as the ultimate double-edged sword, spaces of peace that masked lethal political maneuvering. Every element of the tea ceremony hid layers of meaning and danger. The placement of the bamboo chashoku scoop, for instance, wasn't just about aesthetics. Left at an angle, it could signal conspirators waiting in the garden. The host's deliberate choice of a rustic raku bowl over a gleaming porcelain one might telegraph humility or distract guests from the dagger concealed in their sleeve. Even the act of passing the bowl, rotating it twice to avoid sipping from its front, carried a subtext. I trust you enough to share this moment, but not enough to let down my guard. In an era where alliances shifted like sand, the tea room became a theater of unspoken threats. The famed tea master Sen no Rikyu, who served both Nobunaga and his successor Toyotomi Hideyoshi, knew this intimately. His eventual forced suicide, ordered by Hideyoshi over a dispute about a garden gate's design, proved no one, not even a cultural icon, was safe from the politics steeped in every cup. What makes these treacheries so chilling isn't just the violence, but the contrast. Tea ceremonies were built on wabi-sabi, the appreciation of imperfection and transience. The uneven glaze of a handmade cup, the crackle of charcoal in the hearth, these were meant to inspire mindfulness, not paranoia. Yet in the hands of warlords, chinoyu became a psychological weapon. Hideyoshi, known for his gold-leafed tea rooms and ostentatious gatherings, once hosted a rival in a space so cramped the guests' knees brushed the walls. The message, even in this sacred space, I control every inch you occupy. Another daimyo, after suspecting betrayal, served tea in a bowl deliberately chipped, a silent accusation that the guest had broken their trust. The irony is profound. A ritual meant to strip away pretense became the ultimate stage for deception. Yet perhaps this duality was inevitable. For the samurai who balanced the sword and the scroll, beauty and brutality were never truly separate. The next time you watch steam rise from a whisked bowl of matcha, remember, in feudal Japan, that swirling foam could hide poison. The quiet scrape of a sliding door could herald an ambush, and even the most perfect moment of tranquility was just a breath away from chaos. Beneath the weight of lacquered armor and the sweat of battle, samurai carried an unexpected secret. Their gear smelled exquisite. While we picture battlefields reeking of blood and iron, these warriors perfumed their underarmor with rare agarwood, a fragrance so precious it was worth its weight in gold. Edo period manuals like Bukun Shokoku Ryoji Kai reveal intricate recipes blending spices like clove and cinnamon with resins such as frankincense, creating scents designed to cling to fabric and leather. One surviving recipe from the 17th century instructs warriors to simmer sandalwood chips in plum vinegar, then layer the mixture with crushed camphor, a combination that would have left opponents catching whiffs of something floral and mysterious as they clashed swords. This wasn't just about vanity. Samurai believed scent played a psychological role in combat. The aroma of agarwood, known as ginkgo, was thought to steady the mind and ward off the stench of death, creating a bubble of calm amid chaos. Imagine a cavalry charge where the air wasn't filled with sweat and fear, but with the earthy sweetness of a losewood, a sensory contradiction that disoriented enemies. There's even an account of Date Masamune, the legendary one-eyed daimyo, whose armor was said to carry the scent of magnolia, a deliberate choice to unsettle foes who expected the metallic tang of bloodstained steel. The artistry extended to how scents were applied. Warriors would tuck sachets of blended spices into the lining of their helmets or rub fragrant oils into the leather straps of their chest plates. Some even stored their armor in cedarwood boxes infused with camphor, ensuring the very act of suiting up became a ritual of focus. This attention to detail reveals a profound truth. For the samurai, warfare wasn't just a physical act, it was a multisensory performance where every element, from the gleam of their blades to the whisper of their scent, was choreographed to intimidate and inspire. Yet there's a poignant layer to this tradition. In an era before germ theory, these fragrances may have served a practical purpose, masking the odors of infection in wounds or the decay of fallen comrades. The same samurai who composed haiku about cherry blossoms understood that survival hinged on more than strength. It required mastering the subtle arts of perception. So the next time you imagine a battlefield, don't just picture the clash of steel. Listen for the rustle of scented sachets beneath armor. Breathe in the ghost of centuries-old sandalwood. And remember, even in war, beauty was a weapon. The stage lights dimmed, the wooden floorboards creaked, and the audience held their breath as a lone figure emerged, not a living samurai, but his ghost, clad in tattered armor and smeared with the pale makeup of the dead. Kabuki theater in Edo period Japan thrived on these spectral performances, where vengeful warrior spirits known as onryo became unlikely stars. Among the most famous was Takeido Yotsuya Kaiden, a play based on the legend of a betrayed samurai named Eamon, whose murderous rage transcended death itself. What made these ghostly dramas so compelling wasn't just their supernatural thrills, they were cultural exorcisms, a way for a war-weary society to process the trauma of centuries of civil strife. Consider the 53 Stations of the Tokaido, a series of kabuki plays inspired by the real highway connecting Edo to Kyoto. These productions didn't just entertain, they mapped the nation's psychic wounds. In one scene, the ghost of a wronged warrior might materialize at a roadside inn, his pale face glowing under lantern light as he recounted how treachery cut his life short. Another might feature a child's spirit, a casualty of some forgotten battle, weeping for the father who never returned. These weren't arbitrary scares, they mirrored the collective memory of the Sengoku period, where loyalty meant nothing against the whims of power. The famed actor Ikekawa Danjuro, who specialized in these roles, once confessed, "To play a samurai ghost is to wear the sorrows of history. Every wail, every stiffened movement carries the weight of 10,000 unburied grudges." Theater historians note an eerie pattern. Ghost plays surged in popularity during times of peace. After the Tokugawa shogunate unified Japan, the stage became a safe space to confront the violence that once ravaged the countryside. Audiences could shudder at a phantom's vengeance, then walk home reassured that such chaos was confined to the realm of fiction. Even the makeup held meaning. The signature Eguma-style streaks of indigo beneath the eyes wasn't just for dramatic effect. It evoked the hollow cheeks of corpses left on battlefields, a visual cue that linked entertainment to lived horror. What's often overlooked is how these plays humanized the enemy. A ghost might be terrifying, but his monologue revealed the betrayal that fueled his rage. The warlord who murdered him wasn't some faceless villain, he was the neighbor who prospered while others starved, the official who twisted laws for personal gain. Kabuki's samurai ghosts weren't mindless monsters. They were echoes of real grievances, giving voice to those erased by victors' histories. In a society where speaking ill of the shogunate meant death, the stage became a sanctioned space for truth-telling, wrapped in the guise of spectacle. The legacy of these performances lingers in modern Japan. Walk through Tokyo's Kabukiza theater today, and you'll still see onryo plays performed with the same chilling intensity. The difference, now we recognize them for what they always were, not just ghost stories, but therapy sessions for a nation learning to live with its past. The next time you hear the distant wail of a kabuki flute, remember, it's not just a sound effect, it's the cry of 1,000 samurai finally being heard. In the dead of winter, 1612, a peculiar silence fell over Japan's Christian communities as the Tokugawa shogunate issued an edict that would change the course of history. The Korishitan sect is forbidden. Those who disobey will face execution. For samurai who had embraced Christianity, often at the invitation of Jesuit missionaries decades earlier, this wasn't just a religious crackdown, it was an existential crisis. The shoguns, once tolerant of foreign faiths, now saw Christianity as a Trojan horse for European colonialism, and they moved ruthlessly to stamp it out. Churches were torched, converts forced to tread on sacred images in fumi-e rituals, and those who refused were crucified, beheaded, or burned alive. Yet hidden beneath this brutality lies a forgotten chapter where samurai lords like Otomo Sorin of Bungo weren't just converts, they were fervent patrons, even sending envoys to Rome with gifts for the Pope. The irony is staggering. Just 40 years before the ban, Christianity had flourished among the warrior elite. Portuguese missionaries arriving in 1549 found eager audiences in daimyo courts, where the promise of European trade and advanced weaponry made conversion politically savvy. Otomo Sorin, one of the first major lords to baptize, went so far as to order his vassals to follow suit, even commissioning a stunning gold-leafed chapel in his castle. For these samurai, Christianity wasn't just faith, it was a strategic alliance. Jesuit letters describe how baptized lords adopted Portuguese names, wore rosaries over their armor, and celebrated Mass with the same solemnity they reserved for battlefield rituals. The faith spread so rapidly that by 1580, over 200,000 Japanese, including scores of samurai, were confirmed Christians. Everything changed after the Shimabara Rebellion of 1637. When impoverished Christian peasants and Ronin rose up against oppressive taxes, the shogunate crushed the revolt with overwhelming force, massacring nearly 40,000 rebels. In the paranoid aftermath, all Christians, even loyal samurai, were branded potential traitors. The Tokugawa regime's solution was as ingenious as it was cruel: the danka system, which forced every citizen to register at Buddhist temples and prove they weren't Kurishiten. Suspected Christians were made to spit on crosses or trample images of the Virgin Mary. Their defiance met with gruesome executions. One account tells of a samurai family in Nagasaki who clung to their faith in secret, whispering prayers into hollowed-out statues of Buddha, a practice that birthed the Kakyo Kurishiten, or hidden Christians, who preserved their rituals for centuries underground. The tragedy of Japan's Christian samurai lies in its contradictions. These were warriors who'd once knelt in chapels wearing crucifixes beside their swords, who'd traded letters with Vatican cardinals, only to see their world erased by the very shoguns they served. Today, the ruins of Otomo Soren's chapel stand as silent witnesses to a time when faith and steel intertwined, and a reminder that even the mightiest warriors couldn't withstand the tides of political fear. The next time you see a samurai drama set in Edo-era Japan, remember, beneath the surface of tea ceremonies and cherry blossoms, there were men who prayed to a foreign god, their Bibles hidden beneath the floorboards, their midnight masses a whispered act of rebellion. Long before modern banks and digital transactions, samurai-era Japan had already perfected an ingenious financial system, one that ran not on gold or silver, but on humble grains of rice. In the bustling markets of 17th century Osaka, a revolutionary concept took shape: paper promises that could be traded like currency, backed not by coins but by future harvests. These early checks, called chogi, were the brainchild of rice brokers catering to cash-strapped samurai who received their salaries in grain rather than money. Picture a warrior handing over a slip of paper at a merchant's stall, its elegant calligraphy certifying that 10 bales of rice awaited collection at a nearby warehouse. What seemed like a simple IOU would evolve into something far more sophisticated: the world's first futures market at the Dojima Rice Exchange, where contracts changed hands like stocks centuries before Wall Street existed. The system emerged from necessity. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, samurai stipends were paid in koku, a measure equal to about 5 bushels of rice, enough to feed one person for a year. But warriors needed cash for daily expenses, from sword maintenance to silk robes. Enter the rice brokers, who stored samurai grain in warehouses and issued chogi that could be exchanged for goods or sold to third parties. Soon, these notes circulated like currency, their value fluctuating with harvest yields and market demand. By 1730, Osaka's Dojima district had become the epicenter of this trade, with brokers gathering under a massive wooden board displaying real-time rice prices, a scene eerily reminiscent of today's commodity exchanges. What set Dojima apart was its leap into futures trading. Merchants began buying and selling promises of rice yet to be harvested, gambling on next season's prices. A daimyo anticipating a poor yield could lock in prices early, while speculators bet on shortages or surpluses. The market grew so complex that it developed its own jargon terms like empty rice for futures contracts and shadow prices for unofficial valuations. Government inspectors struggled to regulate the frenzy, occasionally banning certain practices only to see them resurface under new names. The parallels to modern finance are uncanny. Insider trading, short selling, even market bubbles all appeared in Edo-era records centuries before they'd be named in the West. This financial revolution carried an ironic twist. The very system samurai helped create would ultimately erode their power. As merchants grew wealthy from trading rice futures, they began loaning money to cash poor warriors at exorbitant interest rates. Samurai, bound by pride and social codes that forbade engaging in commerce, found themselves trapped in debt cycles, pawning family heirlooms to maintain their status. By the early 19th century, some daimyo were effectively bankrupt, their nominal wealth in rice overshadowed by merchant financiers' liquid capital. The shogunate, sensing the threat, issued repeated edicts cancelling samurai debts, a desperate attempt to prop up a crumbling hierarchy. The legacy of Chogi and Dojima reveals a profound truth. Economics, not just warfare, shaped the samurai's fate. Those paper rice certificates fluttering through Edo's markets carried more disruptive power than any sword. They were the quiet heralds of a new age, where balance sheets mattered as much as battlefield tactics, and where the merchants once scorned as the lowest social class would rise to become the unseen rulers of feudal Japan. Behind the stone walls of Edo period castles, samurai lords didn't just amass weapons and art, they curated menageries of creatures so exotic, they might as well have been mythical. Daimyo like Tokugawa Yoshimune and Maeda Tsunenori flaunted their wealth and global reach by collecting peacocks from India, cassowaries from New Guinea, and even tigers shipped from Portuguese-held Macau. These weren't mere pets, they were living status symbols, proof that a warlord's influence stretched beyond Japan's shores. Jesuit missionary Louis Froys wrote of one Kyushu daimyo who paraded an African gray parrot through the streets, teaching it to greet visitors in Portuguese, a flex that announced his access to Europe's vast trade networks without uttering a word. The logistics of these collections boggle the mind. Imagine a Bengal tiger, sedated with opium-laced meat and crammed into the hold of a Dutch trading ship for the months-long voyage to Nagasaki. Surviving ledgers from the 17th century detail the exorbitant costs. A single peacock could fetch the equivalent of a farmer's lifetime earnings, while a cassowary, with its dagger-like claws and vivid blue neck, was so rare it often required direct negotiations with the Dutch East India Company. Some daimyo went to absurd lengths to showcase their prizes. The Shimazu clan of Satsuma famously built a heated aviary for their tropical birds, its wooden walls lined with imported Brazilian mahogany to mimic the humidity of the Amazon. But these menageries served darker purposes too. Exotic animals were diplomatic tools, gifted between warlords to cement alliances or intimidate rivals. When Toyotomi Hideyoshi received a pair of Persian leopards from Portuguese traders in 1590, he promptly displayed them during a tense negotiation with a rival clan, their restless pacing and snarling jaws a none too subtle metaphor for his own military ambitions. Other daimyo staged fights between imported beasts and local wolves or bears, transforming biology into bloodsport for political theater. The message was clear: just as these foreign creatures dominated Japan's native animals, so too would their owners dominate the islands. What's often overlooked is how these collections reveal the samurai's complicated relationship with the outside world. At a time when the shogunate enforced strict isolationist policies, daimyo flouted the spirit, if not the letter of the law, by cultivating private channels to global trade. A parrot's squawk or a tiger's roar became acts of quiet rebellion, declarations that even in a closed society, power flowed to those who could harness the world's wonders. Today, the descendants of these animals still linger in Japan's zoos, living relics of an era when a warlord's prestige could be measured in feathers, claws, and the sheer audacity to own the unprecedented. In the dim glow of lantern light, a blind masseur named Zatoichi would shuffle through Edo period villages, his wooden cane tapping rhythmically against the dirt roads. To passers-by, he seemed harmless, another disabled man eking out a meager living. But when threatened, that humble cane would snap apart, revealing a razor-sharp blade, and the air would hum with the sound of steel slicing faster than the eye could follow. The legendary Zatoichi wasn't just a fictional hero. He was inspired by real blind warriors like Saito Musashibo Benkei, a 12th century monk whose feats defied all expectations. These fighters turned their so-called disability into an advantage, their heightened senses of hearing and touch making them fearsome opponents in a world where sight was often a liability after sundown. Historical records reveal how blind swordsmen trained differently from their sighted peers. Without visual distractions, they honed their ability to detect subtle shifts in air currents, the crunch of a footstep on gravel, even the faint rasp of an opponent's breath. In duels, they'd often fight with their eyes closed, relying on mushin, a state of no mind, where the body reacted instinctively. The legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi once wrote of facing a blind opponent who could hear the intention behind every strike, forcing Musashi to alter his rhythm mid-swing to avoid predictable patterns. This wasn't mere folklore, it was physiology. Modern studies confirm that when vision is impaired, the brain rewires itself to amplify other senses, a phenomenon these warriors mastered centuries before science could explain it. Japan's tradition of disabled martial artists stretches far beyond swordsmanship. The Todoza, a guild for blind musicians and masseurs founded in the 14th century, doubled as a covert network for intelligence gathering. Members traveled freely between castles, their perceived harmlessness granting them access to sensitive conversations. Some, like the famed Oichi no Kata, used their status to relay messages during wartime, their white canes concealing hollow compartments for scrolls. Even in peacetime, blind practitioners of Aijutsu's sword-drawing arts were respected instructors, their techniques emphasizing close-quarters combat where touch trumped sight. What makes these stories so compelling isn't just the triumph over physical limits, but how they redefine strength. In a culture that revered perfection, the blind swordsman embodied a radical idea. That true mastery came not from flawless senses, but from adapting to one's unique circumstances. The next time you watch Zatoichi's cane sword flash in the moonlight, remember, it's not a fantasy. It's a testament to warriors who turned the world's darkness into their greatest weapon. Beneath the rigid surface of samurai society thrived a tradition as complex as it was controversial, the practice of Shudo, or the way of youth. Far from the puritanical image later eras would impose, Tokugawa period Japan embraced relationships between seasoned warriors and their young male apprentices with surprising openness. Aihara Seikoku's 1687 classic The Great Mirror of Male Love paints vivid scenes of these bonds, where an older samurai might present his beloved disciple with an ornate tanto dagger, its hilt wrapped in matching silk cords, a symbol of devotion as potent as any wedding vow. One tale describes a lord who took 53 adolescent lovers over his lifetime, composing poems for each that compared their beauty to moonlight on sword steel. These weren't clandestine affairs, they were celebrated, even institutionalized, with formal ceremonies mirroring heterosexual marriages. The dynamics of Shudo followed strict codes. An older samurai, the Nenya, would mentor a youth between 12 and 19 known as the Wakashu, guiding him in martial arts, literature, and courtly etiquette. Physical intimacy was often part of this bond, seen as a natural extension of spiritual and intellectual tutelage. Historical scrolls depict couples exchanging sake cups in front of shrine altars, their unions blessed by Shinto priests. The famed swordsman Miyamoto Musashi was said to have taken multiple male lovers throughout his life, including the talented young painter Morita Chuya, whose portrait of Musashi still hangs in Kyoto's Kenin-ji temple. What modern audiences might label as taboo was, for centuries, woven into the fabric of samurai culture, a blend of pedagogy, patronage, and passion. This acceptance stemmed from Buddhist monastic influences, where male-only communities had long practiced spiritual same-sex unions. Warriors adopted the tradition, viewing these relationships as purer than dealings with women, who were often dismissed as distractions from a samurai's duties. The 16th century warlord Takedo Shinjin wrote openly of his love for a young retainer, praising how their bond strengthened his resolve in battle. Even Tokugawa Ieyasu, the shogun who unified Japan, maintained a lifelong relationship with the page Okubo Tadao, later promoting him to chief advisor, a move contemporaries saw as natural rather than scandalous. Everything changed when Japan reopened to the West in the 19th century. The Meiji government, desperate to appear civilized by Victorian standards, criminalized Shudo in 1872, labeling it a barbaric relic. Overnight, centuries of tradition became taboo, erased from official histories and condemned as deviant. Samurai descendants burned family records containing references to male unions, while Western-style schools taught that such relationships had never existed in proper Japanese culture. The irony was bitter. A society that once honored the love between warriors now denied it had ever been real. Today, fragments of this erased history survive in art and literature. A faded ukiyo-e print showing two swordsmen sharing a quiet moment beneath cherry blossoms, or a haunting no-play where a ghost mourns his fallen lover. These echoes remind us that the samurai's world was far more nuanced than later sanitized versions suggest. Behind every lacquered armor and stoic portrait lay human hearts capable of profound connections, whether society chose to remember them or not. The thunder of gunpowder echoed across Japan's shores long before Europeans arrived, yet it wasn't the samurai who first harnessed its power, but their deadliest enemies. During the Mongol invasions of the late 13th century, Kublai Khan's fleets unleashed a terrifying new weapon, teppo, crude tubes of bamboo and iron that spat fire and metal. Japanese defenders, accustomed to the elegant dance of sword and bow, watched in horror as these primitive cannons tore through their ranks. But in a twist of irony, the very technology meant to conquer Japan would eventually become its salvation, once the samurai stopped fearing it and learned to wield it themselves. For centuries after the Mongols' retreat, firearms were dismissed as dishonorable tools, unfit for noble warriors. Swordsmiths refused to craft them, and battlefield chronicles barely mentioned their use. That all changed in 1543, when a Portuguese trading ship ran aground on Tengashima Island. On board were arquebuses, matchlock guns so advanced they made the Mongols' weapons look like toys. Local samurai, initially wary, soon recognized their potential. Within months, Japanese blacksmiths were reverse engineering these foreign marvels, improving their designs with waterproof lacquer and adjustable sights. By the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, Oda Nobunaga's riflemen would prove their mastery, decimating the famed Takedo cavalry with volleys of coordinated gunfire, a tactic Europeans wouldn't adopt for another century. The shift wasn't just technological, it was philosophical. Traditionalists like Takedo Shinjin scoffed at guns as the weapons of cowards, but pragmatists understood war's changing face. Firearms demanded new formations, new strategies, even new codes of conduct. Suddenly, A peasant conscript with minimal training could down an armored knight from 100 paces. The Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, where Tokugawa Ieyasu's gunners outmaneuvered rival clans, marked the final triumph of this revolution. Samurai still carried swords, but now as symbols of status rather than primary arms. The katana's soul remained, but the arquebus's smoke had rewritten the rules. What makes this transformation so remarkable isn't just the speed of adoption, but the depth of reinvention. Japanese gunsmiths didn't merely copy Portuguese designs, they refined them into works of art. Surviving Tanegashima rifles feature intricate inlays of mother-of-pearl and silver, their barrels etched with poetry. Even the act of loading became ritualized, with masters practicing teppo jutsu drills as meticulously as sword strokes. This blend of innovation and tradition captures the samurai's essence, a warrior class that could honor the past while charging fearlessly into the future. The next time you picture a samurai, imagine not just the glint of steel, but the smoldering fuse of a matchlock, because true mastery meant knowing when to cling to tradition and when to set it ablaze. When the smoke of battle cleared and the Edo period brought an uneasy peace to Japan, thousands of masterless samurai found themselves adrift, no lords to serve, no wars to fight, and no income to sustain their dignity. But these Ronin, often portrayed as wandering swordsmen in popular culture, didn't just fade into obscurity. Instead, they carved out an unexpected new role that would leave an indelible mark on urban life. They became firefighters. In a city built almost entirely of wood and paper, where a single cooking fire could reduce entire neighborhoods to ash, these displaced warriors formed organized brigades called machabashi, literally town extinguishers, turning their battlefield discipline into a life-saving civic service. Clad in distinctive indigo happy coats lined with protective amulets and wielding towering matoi standards, these samurai-turned firefighters cut a striking figure as they raced through Edo's narrow streets. The matoi itself was more than just a flag. It was a sophisticated tool, made of heavy wood and lacquered leather. Its intricate design signaled a brigade's rank and district, while its weight allowed firefighters to smash through walls and roofs to create fire breaks. When hoisted vertically, it meant all clear, but when swung wildly in circles, it warned citizens to evacuate, a language of motion every Edo resident understood. The Ronin's military training proved invaluable here. Where ordinary townspeople might panic, these men moved with precision, their chain of command structure ensuring efficient bucket lines and demolition teams. The irony was rich. These were warriors who once trained to take lives, now risking their own to save others. Historical records from the 18th century describe legendary captains like Banzui in Chobai, a former Ronin whose brigade earned fame for daring rooftop rescues. Unlike modern firefighters, machabashi didn't focus on dousing flames. Edo's wells couldn't supply enough water. Instead, they specialized in controlled demolition, tearing down buildings to starve fires of fuel. It was brutal, pragmatic work, requiring the same strategic thinking that once guided battlefield tactics. A surviving manual from 1723 outlines formations adapted from cavalry charges, with teams flanking fires like enemy troops. What's often overlooked is how this transition mirrored Japan's larger societal shift. The Tokugawa shogunate, desperate to prevent unemployed Ronin from becoming bandits or rebels, actively encouraged these fire brigades as a way to channel warrior energy into civic duty. The machabashi system became so respected that even wealthy merchants technically beneath samurai in social rank could earn status by funding brigades, blurring class lines in the name of public safety. By the 19th century, firefighting had become a point of pride for Ronin, their exploits celebrated in kabuki plays and woodblock prints. The very men once seen as threats to stability were now celebrated as protectors, their matoi banners becoming symbols of hope rather than war. The legacy of these warrior firefighters lingers in modern Tokyo's fire departments, which still use ceremonial matoi in parades. Their story is a testament to resilience, proof that honor isn't bound to a single path. When the age of swords ended, these Ronin didn't cling to the past. They reinvented their purpose, trading battlefield glory for something perhaps more noble: the right to stand between chaos and community, their courage now measured in lives saved rather than enemies felled. Long before steampunk or cyberpunk, the samurai were spinning tales of mechanical wonders and futuristic battles, proof that science fiction isn't just a modern genre. In the early 19th century, while Europe was still enchanted by Gothic romances, the celebrated author Kyokute Bakken was crafting Nanso Satomi Hakkenden, a sprawling epic where 8 dog warriors, born from a mystical union between a princess and a celestial hound, embarked on quests filled with talking swords, prophetic dreams, and even early versions of artificial intelligence. This wasn't just fantasy, it was a visionary blend of Bushido ethics and speculative technology, a world where honor collided with the impossible. One of the most striking examples of Edo-era futurism lies in the tale of the Peach Boy, a folk story dating back centuries but continually reimagined by samurai storytellers. In some versions, the hero Momotaro doesn't just recruit animal allies, he commands a fleet of wooden warships propelled by wind and fire wheels, a clear precursor to steam engines. Another tale, The Mirror of Dutch Wonders, described by scholars as Japan's first proto-science fiction, depicted Dutch traders, the only Europeans allowed in Japan during isolation, arriving with mechanical nightingales that sang without breath and lanterns that burned without oil. These weren't mere flights of fancy, they reflected real samurai fascination with foreign technology, filtered through a lens of myth and wonder. What makes these stories so revolutionary is how they merge tradition with innovation. Bakken's Hakkenden, for instance, wrapped its futuristic elements in Confucian ideals of loyalty and filial piety. One of its canine heroes wields a sword forged from a meteorite, its blade humming with unnatural energy, yet his struggles mirror the dilemmas of any Edo period Ronin. Even the villains were ahead of their time. A rogue monk constructs a thunder chariot powered by captive lightning, a machine straight out of a Tesla daydream. These narratives reveal a truth Hollywood often misses. The samurai imagination wasn't shackled to the past. They gazed forward, weaving tales where the sacred and the scientific coexisted. The legacy of these early visionaries lingers in modern anime and manga, where cyborg samurai and neon-lit Edo castles pay homage to that tradition of speculative storytelling. The next time you watch a mecha series or read a dystopian graphic novel, remember the roots of those ideas stretch back to lamp-lit writing rooms where warrior authors dared to ask, what if? Long before space travel or robots, the samurai were already there, dreaming worlds where honor could survive even the strangest futures. Amidst the clash of swords and the whisper of prayers, one deity commanded both fear and reverence in the hearts of samurai Raijin, the capricious thunder god whose drumbeat shook the heavens. Unlike the serene kami of shrines and harvests, this tempestuous figure embodied the raw, untamed forces of nature that warriors faced daily. His iconography was impossible to ignore, a snarling red demon surrounded by taiko drums, his lightning strikes capable of splitting ancient pines or igniting castle roofs in an instant. For samurai whose lives hinged on the unpredictability of battle, Raijin wasn't just a mythological figure, he was a kindred spirit, a reminder that even the mightiest warrior could be humbled by forces beyond control. Lightning held a paradoxical place in samurai lore, A single strike could incinerate a rice storehouse, dooming a clan to famine. Yet the same bolt might herald divine intervention on the battlefield. The legendary warlord Yusugi Kenshin, known as the Dragon of Echigo, was said to have ridden into combat during thunderstorms, his cavalry's charge timed to the thunderclaps. Chroniclers wrote that his enemies fled not from his swordsmen, but from the eerie spectacle of their banners snapping in the electrified air, as if Raijin himself had blessed their campaign. This duality, destruction and providence intertwined, made lightning both an omen and a weapon in the samurai imagination. Protection against Raijin's whims took ingenious forms. Before marching into storms, warriors would tuck gohei strips of sacred Shinto paper into their armor's lacings or helmet crests. These weren't mere decorations. Folded into lightning bolt shapes and inscribed with sutras, they functioned as spiritual conductors meant to divert celestial fury. Some clans took it further. The Date family of Sendai commissioned special thunder helmets with towering Kuwagata antlers made of hollow bamboo, a design believed to dissipate electrical charges. Even horses weren't left vulnerable. Surviving stable records from Kumamoto Castle detail leather blinders stitched with Raijin's face, a talismanic attempt to calm spooked steeds during tempests. The most striking rituals occurred not in shrines but on rain-lashed battlefields. During the siege of Osaka in 1615, defenders were observed waving shied zigzag paper streamers from the castle walls as a summer storm rolled in. To outsiders, it might have seemed like superstition, but these were calculated acts of spiritual warfare. By mimicking lightning's jagged paths, they sought to return Raijin's energy skyward, a metaphysical counterattack against both natural and human enemies. Later, Tokugawa physicians would note with curiosity that warriors who carried brass-hilted swords suffered fewer lightning injuries, an early glimpse of grounding principles disguised as divine favor. Raijin's legacy endures in modern Japan's festivals, where drummers channel his primal rhythms, and in idioms like "Raijin has no mercy," a reminder that nature bows to no one. For the samurai, worshipping this thunder god wasn't about begging for safety. It was about acknowledging the chaos that defined their existence. In the end, their reverence for lightning revealed a profound truth. True courage isn't the absence of fear, but the wisdom to respect the forces that could obliterate you in a flash, then strap on your armor and march into the storm anyway. The year was 1944. Deep into the Pacific War, when a frail old man in a threadbare kimono knelt on a tatami mat in a Tokyo suburb, carefully composing his final poem. His name was Nakamura Yujiro, and though the world had long moved on from swords and castles, he was by every measure the last true samurai. While Hollywood mythologizes Seigo Takamori's rebellion in 1877 as the dying gasp of the samurai era, the truth is far more haunting. Men like Nakamura kept Bushido alive not on battlefields but in the quiet persistence of daily life, their unyielding spirit threading through Japan's march into modernity. Nakamura's story defies easy categorization. Born in 1872, just as the Meiji government abolished the samurai class, he grew up in a world where top-knots and katana were outlawed. Yet his father, a former retainer of the Tokugawa shogunate, schooled him in the old ways. By the time Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, Nakamura was one of the few left who remembered the weight of a real sword, not the mass-produced blades issued to imperial officers. He never served in the military. His age and declining health barred him, but his influence seeped into the war effort in unexpected ways. Young officers, disillusioned by the mechanized brutality of modern warfare, sought him out like a living relic. In his tiny wooden house surrounded by scrolls of Confucian classics, he taught them something the military academies couldn't: how to reconcile Bushido's honor with the era of tanks and bombers. The irony was profound. The Imperial Army, with its German-style drills and American-made machinery, had co-opted samurai imagery while gutting its essence. Soldiers shouted banzai charges, evoking the warrior spirit, yet their tactics relied on industrialized slaughter. Nakamura saw this hypocrisy firsthand. In 1943, a young naval pilot visited him, confessing his terror at the thought of kamikaze missions. Instead of patriotic platitudes, Nakamura handed him a tattered copy of Yamamoto Tsunetomo's Hagakure. "The way of the warrior is not death," he allegedly said, "but the clarity to choose death when necessary and to question why." That pilot would survive the war, later claiming Nakamura's words made him refuse his final orders. Nakamura's death in 1944 went unnoticed by the press, his passing marked only by a small circle of former students. Yet his legacy lingers in the contradictions of modern Japan. The same Bushido values that inspired feudal loyalty also fueled wartime atrocities. The discipline that crafted exquisite tea ceremonies was twisted to justify blind obedience. Today, as neon lights flicker over Tokyo's skyscrapers, the last samurai's lesson remains. Traditions don't vanish, they evolve, sometimes in ways their founders could never foresee. The sword may have rusted, but its shadow still cuts across the centuries. The echoes of the samurai era resonate far beyond feudal Japan. They pulse through boardrooms, dojos, and movie screens today, proving these warriors' legacy is anything but static. In Tokyo's corporate districts, salarymen invoke Bushido principles during high-stakes negotiations, framing loyalty and integrity as competitive advantages rather than archaic ideals. Companies like Toyota and Sony explicitly reference samurai ethics in their training programs, where honor translates to transparency in deals and courage means innovating despite market risks. This isn't mere branding, it's a philosophical bridge connecting 16th-century swordsmen to 21st-century entrepreneurs. The parallels between a daimyo's strategic patience and a CEO's long-term vision reveal how deeply these values permeate modern leadership, where the battlefield is now a spreadsheet, but the stakes feel just as visceral. Martial arts offer an even more tangible link to the past. The Iaido practitioner drawing a blade in one fluid motion isn't just performing a ritual, they're channeling centuries of muscle memory, each movement a dialogue with ancestors who perfected these forms under life or death pressure. Modern dojos emphasize zanshin, the state of relaxed awareness after a strike, as a metaphor for mindfulness in daily life. This philosophy spills into global pop culture. When the Matrix's Neo dodges bullets in slow motion, he's unwittingly replicating the Mushin, no-mind state samurai cultivated to react without hesitation. The difference: where Hollywood sells spectacle, traditional arts preserve the discipline beneath it, teaching that true mastery lies not in flashy techniques, but in the quiet consistency of practice. Cinema has been perhaps the most potent ambassador for samurai ideals, though not always an accurate one. Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai didn't just inspire Western remakes like The Magnificent Seven. It dissected the tension between duty and individualism, showing warriors who fought for farmers despite receiving no glory. Contrast this with the lone wolf Ronin of countless video games, cool but ahistorical figures who prioritize personal vengeance over communal responsibility. Manga like Vagabond and Rurouni Kenshin strike a balance, blending kinetic action with psychological depth. Take Kenshin's reverse blade sword, a fictional invention, yet one that symbolizes the series' central question: can violence ever truly protect peace? These stories succeed when they honor the complexity of their sources. reminding us that samurai were neither saints nor demons, but humans navigating impossible choices. The most enduring myth, however, may be the false dichotomy between East and West. Chivalry and Bushido shared more than we admit. Both prized loyalty, both grappled with the morality of violence, and both were later romanticized beyond recognition. Yet where European knights swore fealty to divine authority, samurai answered to earthly lords. Where chivalry exalted women, at least in theory, Bushido often marginalized them. These nuances matter because they free us from exoticizing the samurai as mysterious Orientals. They were pragmatists who wrote poetry, diplomats who wielded swords, and yes, sometimes hypocrites who betrayed their own codes. That's the real gift of their legacy, not a list of rules to follow blindly, but an invitation to wrestle with what honor means when the armor comes off. So the next time you see a samurai reference, whether in a boardroom motto, a karate class, or a Netflix series, look past the surface. Behind every katana cliché lies a richer truth, that the past never really dies, it just finds new ways to cut through the noise of the present.